Good morning, everyone. Honored to be joined by some of my colleagues here, usual Vice Chair Ted Lieu, but also our Democratic Policy and Communications Chair Jonah Goose and DPCC Co-Chair Veronica Escobar. We begin, first I wanted to just, on behalf of House Democrats, let everyone know that we are in constant communication with Jerry Connolly. A lot of us reached out to him via text and via calls yesterday, but the violence did. They do such an amazing job, and so our thoughts are with Jerry and his team. But I wanted to begin by talking about Speaker McCarthy, who continues to put the demands of the most extreme members of his conference over the needs of everyday Americans. We're on the verge of a Republican-led default because these individuals want to cut veterans' health care, manufacturing jobs, and so many other important areas. House Republicans can end this at any time they want, but they have to refuse to give up on the ransom demands that they have passed. They have yet to take any meaningful steps to lower costs, to make healthcare more affordable, or to help our economic recovery. Led by the Biden-Harris administration, over 12.7 million new jobs created. They have not addressed anything related to gun violence, prevention, and making sure that our children and our families are safe. Their top priority this Congress is to make it easier for the wealthy and the well-connected to cheat on their taxes. Where are these so-called moderate Republicans as well? They say one thing back home, and then they come back and they give their voting card to Marjorie Taylor Greene, George Santos, and Speaker McCarthy. We cannot go down a path toward default. 3 times under the prior administration, without incident or hostage taking, Democrats joined Republicans to pass debt limit increase. Unless these reasonable Republicans can come to their senses and reject extremism, we're afraid of the path that they are on currently. Vice Chair Ted Lieu.
Thank you, Chairman Aguilar. This is National Police Week, and Democrats honor the brave and courageous law enforcement officers and their families. And I just want to give you some facts. Democrats passed the American Rescue Plan that funded law enforcement agencies and provided a significant amount of money to local jurisdictions to keep law enforcement personnel on the job and from being laid off during the pandemic. In contrast, Republicans recently voted for the Default on America Act that would cut thousands of law enforcement positions. Last week, a prominent member of the Republican caucus, the member purportedly known as George Santos, was indicted by law enforcement. And recently, the Republican frontrunner for nominee for the presidential election continues to praise the mob that attacked the Capitol on January 6th. Donald Trump called January 6th a beautiful day. Those are the facts. And now I want to introduce my wonderful colleague and friend, Jonah Goose, who is the terrific chair of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee.
Well, thank you first and foremost, Vice Chair Lieu and Chairman Aguilar for your leadership. I want to start by underscoring a point that our chairman articulated so well, which is in the last 48 hours or so, we've heard quite a bit from Speaker McCarthy and some House Republicans as they attempt to lay blame for a Republican default that grows more and more precarious by the day. The only group of people in Washington threatening a default are House Republicans. No one else. House Democrats from day one have made clear our obligation to pay our bills, to do the right thing by the American people, and prevent a disastrous default. Speaker McCarthy and House Republicans have taken the exact opposite approach. They have manufactured a crisis, forced a false choice on the American people to choose between draconian and cruel cuts in the Default on America Act on the one hand, or a catastrophic default on the other, and now attempting to leverage this crisis of their own making. So it's important, as Vice Chair Lieu said, for us to understand and be cognizant of the facts. There is only one party that is threatening default, and it is House Republicans. One note I would just close on. There was some polling that came out just a few days ago, and I would encourage all of you to take a look. It shows what we all know to be true, which is that the Default on America Act is deeply unpopular with the American public. 58% of Americans, when they find out what is in that disastrous bill, oppose it. That includes, by the way, 32% of Republicans, 1/3 of Republicans across the country. Why is that? Of course, the reason is obvious, because their bill would lay off teachers, lay off first responders, strip away food assistance from millions of families across the country, impose draconian cuts on healthcare for seniors, and so many others. It's why, by the way, House Republicans and Speaker McCarthy decline at every turn to talk about what is actually in their bill, because they know that is deeply unpopular with the American people. It's time for them to get serious. Do the right thing by the American people. With that, I'd like to turn it now to my wonderful colleague, co-chair of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, Veronica Escobar of Texas.
Thank you so much, Chair Neguse. Thank you, Chair Aguilar, Vice Chair Ted Lieu. As many of you all know, I represent the beautiful community of El Paso, Texas, which has been in the news for some time now because of the number of migrants fleeing their homeland who've been arriving at our nation's front door. First, some context. We know that this is not just an issue that El Paso is facing. It's not just an issue, in fact, that our country is facing. We are seeing a Western hemispheric refugee crisis of historic proportions. And every country in our hemisphere has been impacted by hundreds of thousands of displaced people who are fleeing their communities, their families, their language, their homeland in search of safety and a better life. First, let me share with you what's happening in El Paso. Our apprehensions and encounters have dropped dramatically and significantly. The challenge that we are facing right now as a community comes from a ruling by a Republican judge, a Trump judge, who is essentially halting a policy that has been in place for a number of administrations. And that is once migrants are processed, once their criminal records checks are complete, and they have sponsors, they have been paroled into the country to await their asylum hearing with their sponsor. But this Trump judge, suddenly outraged by a policy that the Trump administration engaged in, has put a stop to that temporarily. That has meant that our processing facilities in El Paso are seriously overcrowded. They are not at the same level of overcrowding that we saw during the Trump administration, where when I brought colleagues of mine to El Paso, where we saw hundreds and thousands of people outside in triple-digit heat, where we saw at least 6 children die in custody. But we are very concerned about the overcrowding nonetheless. And we hope that the administration is successful on its appeal and can relieve that overcrowding that is unsafe, not just for migrants in American custody, but it's unsafe for the agents and personnel at the facility as well. I want to provide additional context about how we got here. Many of us, myself included, have long talked about the fact that Title 42 was making things worse. Title 42 essentially created a revolving door and incentivized multiple crossings by the same vulnerable populations over and over and over again. Late last year, when the administration asked for adequate funding, they warned Congress, the administration warned Congress that they needed sufficient resources in order to adequately address the lifting of Title 42. But out of the Senate came an appropriations bill that slashed the administration's request in half. When that bill got over in December to the House, the vast majority of Republicans voted against it. Included in that bill was funding for more Border Patrol agents, for more technology, for more funding for communities like El Paso, all the way to New York City, that would help these communities process and provide hospitality and support to migrant populations. They also, in this bill, also was more funding for immigration judges. So House Republicans, almost to a person, voted against those investments. And some of those same Republicans parachute into communities like mine, take their selfies at the wall, and hold press conferences denouncing the administration's lack of resources. So they cannot have it both ways. I would encourage everyone to hold them to account. It's not what they say, it's what they do. And speaking of what they do, last week they passed a draconian border bill, which, by the way, would make illegal the NGO support that communities across the country rely on for migrant populations. So we are at a moment where it's long past time for Republicans to work with us in a bipartisan manner to truly address the challenge that has gone unaddressed for decades, mostly because of Republican intransigence. But we stand ready to work with them for real and comprehensive bipartisan solutions. Thank you, and I turn it back to our chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Veronica. A question, Mariana?
You all have talked about a discharge petition before. I think tomorrow is the day that you can start collecting those signatures. A lot of that hinges on today's meeting and how it goes. I'm going to ask you, what are the parameters that you all in leadership are actually thinking about? Okay, things are going well. We don't need to deploy this. I know it's already like Plan Z for you all, the last ditch option. But what if something doesn't happen today? What is that barometer for telling Democrats, we should prepare for this backup final option?
Well, I think it is a break glass, option, but we don't quite. We're going to wait until the outcome of the conversations that the leader has, that the Democratic leader has with the White House, before we ask our colleagues to do anything. But as you mentioned, the discharge is, people are able potentially to sign it tomorrow, but that is not any instruction that we have given our colleagues at this point. We want to see how these conversations go, but we appreciate the work that Mark DeSaulnier and Jim McGovern, as well as the Democratic leader and Democratic whip, to ensure that this is an option. Look, we've said this from the very beginning. Avoiding a Republican default is the goal here. And as soon as Speaker McCarthy can tune out the most extreme members of his caucus and he feels free to have a conversation with us, we're willing to engage in that discussion. There should be no hostage taking, and we should not threaten the full faith and credit of the United States government. We need to do everything we can to avoid default. House Democrats have acted that way. That has been our posture, and that's why we created the ability to have this option down the line. We'll see if we need to implement it. We'll give the negotiators and the folks in the room the space to do that, and then we'll see the outcome from there. Max?
Yeah, I was wondering, how concerned are you personally about a default? And Republicans are saying, look, they passed their plan. It's now up to the White House and McCarthy to negotiate. What's your reaction to those claims? They think that it's Democrats that are staying in the way here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's crazy that Republicans call this a plan, that they're willing to hang their hat on this is a plan, when most of their members are walking away from the specifics of this, cutting 22% of so many vital programs. And when we call them out on it, on cuts to veterans, they say, no, we don't mean that. I'd refer you to the letter that OMB Director Shalonda Young put out yesterday too. So taking the latest Republican comments at their face value, that they're going to protect defense and homeland and veterans, means a 30% cut to NIH, Meals on Wheels, so many vital programs that are utilized in our communities. We think it's nuts, but my posture, and I'll ask my colleagues if they care to chime in too, but I'm incredibly scared with where we are, and this Republican-led default has us all scared. We want to make sure that we don't get anywhere near that, but at this point, Speaker McCarthy needs to tune out the most extreme members of his conference and work with us. And at some point, I think, as I mentioned last week, Leader McConnell is going to have to weigh in as well as we get closer to this. And I know Senate Republicans don't want to weigh in, but their negotiating position, if that is their point, then they're basically saying that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar and George Santos are the ones who are calling the shots over here. And I don't think that that's anything that the American public wants.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can your caucus accept a deal with work requirements? And do you think the president was wrong to suggest possibly putting it on the table?
I think Leader Jeffries speaks for our caucus, and he spoke out yesterday about that. I would just remind you that there are work requirements already on some of these programs. The average SNAP benefit, by the way, is $6 per person per day. That's who Republicans are. They would rather cut that or eliminate it and take food out of the mouths of kids in order to make a political point. By the way, individuals of working age already have a 20-hour work requirement that is part of these programs. So that already exists. This is something that the Republican conference has made a key point that doesn't really exist. 43% of SNAP recipients are children. Countless number, millions of them live in rural communities. 16% are seniors. 10% are people with disabilities. They should be specific. If they want to cut SNAP, they should tell us who they want to cut SNAP from kids, from individuals with disabilities, from seniors. But again, we just get broad strokes, and they just talk about these work requirements because that's what Kevin McCarthy wants to do. He is, held captive by the most extreme members of his conference each and every day, and this is something that they want.
Thank you, sir. You talked about these meetings that are ongoing, wanting to give them space, characterize them as negotiations. Would you say at this point that there was any possibility of House Democrats voting for something besides a clean debt limit increase, if that's something that President Biden were to end up supporting?
We've made clear that we're, and you heard me say 2 months ago from this podium, we are happy to engage in negotiations and conversations about debts, deficits, spending, revenues. Those should all be part of the discussions. Those are generally held in the Budget Committee, the Appropriations Committee, the Ways and Means Committee. Those are the committees of jurisdiction. And we're happy to engage with our colleagues, just like we always have in the annual spending bills. We should not be negotiating the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, whether we pay our bills or whether we get closer to a Republican-led default. That's what concerns us at this point. But we're happy to engage in conversations about spending. We have maintained that. I see the meetings that Leader Jeffries is in with the president and other legislative leaders is going down that path. And so that's something that we're happy to engage with. And I hope others are part of that conversation, like Ranking Member DeLauro and other members, as we get further down those discussions about annual spending bills. That's where the conversation should happen.
So could Democrats then
Mike.
Have you decided on the legislation that will be attached to the discharge petition? How long ideally would you like to pick the debt ceiling?
No, and at this point, no decisions have been made. We've not asked members to sign. We have not identified what is in that. The debt limit obviously can be raised by putting a dollar amount or tying it to a calendar. We have not talked about that internally. Right now, this is just an option, a break glass option if conversations are not going well. But again, this is on so-called moderate Republicans. Do they want to engage? Do they want to have a conversation with us? Do they want to protect the economy, the job creation that has happened under the Biden-Harris administration, or do they want to continue to allow George Santos and Marjorie Taylor Greene to guide everything that they do?
Just to follow up on that real quick, they wanted to kick it till next year, meaning you do it twice, this thing twice before the election. I assume you just want to do it one time.
I don't see any way that we kick the can down the road for anything less than 2 years. That doesn't make any sense to me. We've been down this road before. There's no sense in having anything tied to a spring or early 24 date.
Mr. Chair,
Last question.
where do you all stand
Ben-
on
Ben.
spending unspent COVID funding?
I just wanted to ask you quickly about Feinstein. California's up there. What have you've seen her in the halls and
I'm going to let Joe Goose answer this question.
you've seen her in the halls. She doesn't appear to be in good health. Are you at all worried that she came back too soon? Are you worried that, about her being able to vote? I mean, do you think it was appropriate for her to come back now?
I don't have a medical degree, so I'm not going to comment on how she's feeling or what she looks like. Look, over in the Senate, they have folks from a variety, from a wide spectrum of ages, and we don't ask people their health status when they vote. But I will say what I said up here before, and I think the vice chair has said this as well. Look, we expect Senate Democrats to have our back on some of these, votes and discussions. We expect them to be present and to vote on confirming judges, and we expect them to be able to cast votes to avoid a Republican-led default. That's what we're focused on right now. I appreciate the fact that she is back working, and we wish her nothing but the best. And as I've said before, she'll guide the discussion on timing and what's appropriate, hopefully in consultation with her personal doctors and her family and friends, and that's how it should be.
Democrats don't get in the way of conversations between patients and their doctors. Senator Feinstein came back last week and she voted, and that was very good. And so we expect her to have conversations with her doctor and do whatever she thinks is best for her and the constituents she represents.
Nick, did you have one?
Yeah, I mean, with the House scheduled to be out of session at the end of the month, right around the X date, do you think the House should stay in session through the Memorial Day recess?
That's a question. The majority leader guides the calendar. So that's probably a Scalise question, but I expect Congress to do our work. And I speak on behalf of the House Democratic Caucus that we want to get this done. We want to solve this. None of us are itching to go back home if we have present work to do. And so our hope is that we continue to make progress, that Republicans tune out the extremism, and that we can pass something that lifts the debt limit and avoids default. That's the important piece right now.
Sure. I would just echo remarks of Chairman Aguilar. Anybody who watched the House Democratic Caucus in the 117th Congress understands that this caucus is always prepared to do the people's work, probably the most robust legislative calendar in the modern history of the Congress. So I think it's a fair question, but as the chair said, it's a question best reserved for Majority Leader Scalise. House Democrats will be prepared to do what is necessary to get it done.
Thank you.
Just quickly, where would you all
Thanks so
stand
much.
on
Appreciate
spending
it.
unspent